synchronicity. This is synchronicity.
This is synchronicity.
This is synchronicity.
This is synchronicity.
This is synchronicity.
Welcome to Synchronicity. This week, my guest Shane Mauss returns. How would I say his name right this time? If you listen to the first episode I did with Shane, I called him Shane Mauss. That's not right. His name's Shane Mauss. All right. Corrected that. I feel better about it. Felt bad when I first did it. I'm like, why did I say that? Anyway, neither here nor there. This episode, fantastic. Fantastic episode for so many reasons. I'm a fan of this episode. If I heard this episode and it wasn't me, and it wasn't Shane, I would like it. And I'm saying that as objectively as possible because I think it touches on, at least for me, so many experiences that not only have I personally experienced, that I've found many other people have experienced in some degree on some level of the spectrum of weird experiences. People can relate to many of the things that we discuss here. So for those of you who don't know, Shane... what did I call this episode? Pierce the veil. He went over the edge, off the cliff, off the reservation. What are the other terms? Lost his marbles. And I say these with a happy, tone because I know I have a pretty good sense of who Shane is at this point, and hearing him candidly speak about this, truthfully, having gone through a very similar experience. In many ways as Shane, he's only 9 months removed from the initial, what do we want to call it? I refuse to call these things breakdown, psychosis, any of these things, because I think when you do that, you box certain characteristics or attributes or qualities together and label them, which is restrictive in a lot of ways. Now, I really want to get this clear in the first part of this intro here, that when we're talking about things like mental illness or mental instability, the first and very most important thing, no matter how esoteric or mystical or woo or grounded or practical or scientific or empirical about this stuff, is really important. Remember that you can't, if you're in any danger to yourself, physically, permanently, or others, that is a big time red flag for whatever state you're in. So if you're getting self-destructive thoughts in any capacity that really you have any sense of acting on or anything like that, you talk to someone. And just, I want to get this out of the way too. Like, whatever self-medicating, mental protocol, psychological protocol you have for maintaining stability psychologically, you can always use other modalities. It's always worth exploring. That's why I do this podcast. I like to hear from sound healers, from astrologers, from body people, from meditation people, from psychonauts, from rigorous science people, various mystical traditions, Buddhism. There's so many different things that you can look at. And I think it's not that you go and sample all of them and are flighty about it, but you can see what resonates with you and what's worth sticking with. So that's really important. I want to say that because I don't want to be cavalier about taking psychedelics or anything else and not say that, like, yeah, man, you can go over the edge on these things. And not everyone comes back. I was just in Woodstock the other day with Eli and Alexis. And, Woodstock is an interesting place. There's a lot of touristy people and it's a cute little town. The weather was nice, but there are people who are residing in Woodstock who probably came there in the late 60s and who never left, maybe not by choice, but because they're gone. And I'm not saying they're not homeless, they're not degenerates, they're not indigent, but they're gone. Like, they are no longer in our dimension, and maybe that's great for them. Who are we to judge? But I'm saying if you have a desire to integrate in with society in real life, you probably want to stay somewhat tethered to this consensus reality, no matter how painful or, disturbing or irritating that may be. So that's important. So getting back to Shane, if you remember, if you haven't heard the first conversation, I highly recommend listening to it. Just because Shane was coming at, and you'll hear in the beginning here, Shane was coming at this from a very different perspective. He was really rigorously penetrating the universe. That sounded weird the way I said it, but investigating the universe, via a scientific, empirical lens, almost exclusively. And this is interesting because he was having really weird and what I guess people call normal DMT experiences, which are just out of this world, for lack of a better term. So it was an interesting conversation. I was like, oh man, I wonder if when he's going to have something happen that kind of shifts that viewpoint. Not because I thought I knew better, but because I know that tends to happen, especially if you're really plunging into the psychedelic world. So this did happen to Shane. I heard about it first, I think, on Duncan's podcast. Great episode. Check that out. Then Pete Holmes' podcast, which I listened to right before I spoke to Shane yesterday. And this was at the urging of a lot of people who got in touch with me and was like, hey, I heard Shane on this podcast. I heard him talk about this. Like, you said a lot of the same things in, your synchronicity episode, the backstory and all of that stuff. So I was like, all right, cool. So I listened to Duncan's episode pretty soon after it came out and was like, yeah, that's some shit. I get it. I totally get it. And it's like, I guarantee we'll do an episode in the future. The timing worked out for this one, and we talk specifically. Shane shares his experience, kind of his perspective now. I share, as much as I can about my experience to kind of relay that there are many similarities and things that I find interesting and synchronistically, and also a perspective that I've kind of gained over the years, retrospectively unpacking what the fuck happened, which still takes, there will be days where I just like, oh man, that's what that could have meant. And, you'll see Shane has a very analytical mind and he can toss ideas through his head over and over and over, not in a bad way. It's actually a very productive thing to do for a lot of people. But if you kind of lose your bearing amidst that, it can be a really tough thing. So we're talking about a lot of things here in this episode. Again, mental health and psychological health and emotional health related to many of the experiences we talk about on this podcast, I think is really a big reason I do this. It's we want to make sure that people are, you're going to go through some shit. Let's just be clear about that. Like, this is what's so interesting. Like, when people talk about mental health and mental illness, about the only negative emotion that I think we permit as a society, and quote unquote negative, is something like grief. Like, if someone is grieving over something like a death, no one's like, what the fuck are you doing? What's the matter with you? It's no big deal. And like, that person would be a dick, even if they had some enlightened perspective that it wasn't actually a big deal. We permit that. But a lot of other negative emotions, we don't really permit in society, or at least in social context. And some of those are really good. We don't want everyone running around yelling and screaming at each other all of the time whenever they're slightly upset. But this also creates a tremendous amount of psychological strain on people where they're, repressing or pushing things down that can manifest in any number of ways. And when we take psychedelics, what can often happen is a lot of that content comes right to the surface, and it can project as an outward manifestation or an internal mind state. Often the two are the same exact thing. So when we're thinking about that, recognize that no matter how stable, wonderful everything is going for you, and this isn't like to freak you out or anything, shit happens in life. That's just what happens. So what we're trying to do is figure out, how do we deal with that? How do we make that a positive? How do we take these shitty or not so great experiences, gain the nuggets of wisdom that are almost always embedded in those experiences, observe them, and come out of it with a new perspective, right? The classic Campbellian hero's journey, but for ourselves. And that's what we're talking about ultimately. So officially, I think I've rambled on way too much. This episode speaks for itself. You'll hear what we speak about. And yeah, for anyone listening who's had similar experiences, I love to hear about them. And I understand sometimes it's hard to write and speak about them. It's okay sometimes to just get it out. I've had many of you do that. And if I only respond with like, that's really awesome, that's really cool, or like a heart, know that I am not being trite. Usually it's just a time thing, but also like I know when I used to write things like that and think about things like that and tell other people things like that, that's probably all that I need to hear back. That someone acknowledged what was going on, no one has all of the answers related to all these stuff. There's certainly phenomena that seem to be increasing, and people are more willing to talk about it maybe. So yeah, I don't know what I'm talking about here. Thanks to everyone listening. Thanks to the patrons on Patreon. Got that right this time. Patrick Nemchek continues to be an awesome person for producing essentially every episode for the past, 8 months or so. Crypto Sync. We're doing live question and answer sessions. So I have a YouTube channel. I'm not really promoting my YouTube channel. If anyone knows of a better way to get video content recorded quickly out there that I can have accessible, let me know. I know there's Vimeo, but I'm not going to go through that whole thing. But I can live stream to YouTube, which works pretty well. Anyway, this is all to say we're doing Q&As related to crypto. So if you have questions, at least a couple Thursdays a month, I'll be opening this up for anyone. So you can go on YouTube and you can ask questions, or you can submit questions in advance. This way, if you're just kind of annoyed about me talking about crypto, well, maybe you have enough money. You don't have to worry about these things, or you just don't get how crazily paradigm shifting this will be, which sounds probably trite if you're not into it. But if you're somewhere in the middle and you're like, I don't know, I'm like paying for some server, I don't know about all this, but I do have a question, this is kind of a bridge for you to kind of like ask me what the fuck is going on and see if I have an answer that's suitable or interests you. So that takes place. You can sign up for the Crypto Sync mailing list or the Synchronicity mailing list. Got all these things. Listen, here's the thing about email. I hate email, I think at this point, officially. I truly loathe it. So why am I having people sign up for an email list? I still think it's like the most effective way to communicate with people without being totally intrusive, right? A lot of people do text messaging, text this number and you got to put on their text list. That's a nightmare. Anytime I've made the mistake of doing that and I'm like, oh, I got a text from a human being, it's like some fucking text messaging thing. It's like, oh, I now hate whatever this is. So I still think it's kind of the best way, and all I'll be sharing on the email list for CryptoSync is things related to cryptocurrency, and for Synchronicity, only things related to the podcast, and once in a while, some crossover thing if I think it's important related to cryptocurrency, but very rarely. I'm trying to keep these things very separate. So I hate email. I'm sure you hate email too. Sign up for my email list. Amazing. Nailed it. All right. Without further ado, here is Shane Mauss.
Remind me when our last one was and what we talked about, if you remember.
The date of the last one, let me check here. I actually don't have it. I'll just look at the podcast stuff. We were speaking about some pretty interesting things. I think it was right before you had some experiences, and we were primarily discussing kind of this intellectual, analytical part of the brain relative to the mysticism and kind of synchronistic, unexplainable phenomenon. And it was kind of me cajoling you and being like, yeah, but there's this mystical shit that sometimes you can't explain. It's super weird. It happened to me. And you're like, yeah, I kind of get that. I've had some things, but I'm not really sure. And then lo and behold, it prods back.
Yeah.
Let me see the date here. This should be interesting for you. You'll have a better idea of what this means. Where are we? 6 to 10 people hit me up after listening to you on various podcasts being like, yo, you got to talk to Shane again. He had some shit happen that I think you can relate to. So episode 72 is December 7th, 2000. No, that can't be right. Yeah, no, March 1st, 2017.
March 1st, 2017. Oh, yeah, okay. I forgot one other thing. Oh, yeah. A lot has happened since then, for sure.
So, I mean, I'd love to. What was going on when we were last with you? Like, what was happening in March 1st? I mean, we were talking about you gearing up. You were on tour. You were doing this. I think you were just beginning or in the middle of the documentary. And I know
I
this
think I would have been just beginning the documentary
just
at that
beginning.
time.
Yeah. Um, so, what was the trajectory? And let's just jump right in. How you doing, by the way? How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm wonderful. I can relate to I think a lot of what you've been through, and not only related to psychedelics and psychological states and mystical states. But I was just listening to you on the Pete Holmes thing, the recent one you did, and this idea of just kind of being like, I think I'm done. Not in like a nihilistic kind of like a fuck this way, but just like I'm keep accomplishing everything I want to accomplish, and things keep
Yeah.
happening, and it's like, all right, let's find kind of the thing here that's going on. And I think I have my own personal answer, but I'm super curious to kind of hear where you are about that, and we'll get to that. But let's, for listeners maybe who last caught you, let's assume they've been under a rock since March 1st, 2017. What the fuck has been going on, man?
Oh, not much. Well, a lot. So I started this documentary, and I was like at the same time kind of wrapping up my psychedelic tour, and I was going through depression at the time, so I used mushrooms for that, as I often do. And then I just started, because I was making this documentary, I was just kind of just doing way more psychedelics than normal and is reasonable. I was just trying to really capture the experience. Wasn't allowing much time for integration, and the thing was that it was actually going like really fantastically well. It was helping with my depression, and it was keeping me creative and all these great things, or at least that's the story I tell myself. And then I had kind of during this documentary, I had I mean the short-ish version is, and I don't even know what a short version of this story is. I hadn't done DMT in a while because DMT was starting to get kind of spooky, and it was starting to get less and less explainable, and in terms of like intellectualizing it in a
rational,
in a rational kind of physiological neuroscience kind of way. And so I had kind of taken a break from it. And then I decided to do it for the documentary. And DMT had been like making predictions, like as soon as I arrived in the DMT space, it was like it was showing me that it knew I was going to be there at that exact moment, like in that space, like it knew like where I was, and exactly it was like if I smoked DMT, it would at that time show me where I would be like 3 months from now, like the next time I smoked DMT, but I wouldn't know it until I smoked it. And it would be like, see all these things that we showed you? It's the things that are in your room right now. Yeah. And so that's when it was like getting really weird. And I was just like, I think I'm kind of done with DMT. And I felt like I had like a near, like I almost felt like I went into a seizure or something one time on it as well.
Yeah.
Like really, really pushing the boundaries of the maximum amount of DMT that I can smoke. So anyway, I smoked DMT on this documentary. I didn't even do that much, really. I I was really kind of just doing it for show, just to like
For the cameras.
or see and get into hyperspace or whatever. And this right away, there's just like this thing that's like not surprised that I'm there or even like, phased by the fact that and it's just like, okay, you see all of this, and it's just like controlling all of these different multiverses or whatever.
Yeah.
And it's just like, okay, now you got the cameras. Now, like, tell people what this is and how it works. And it's not. I mean, it doesn't mean anything because it's not like unfortunately, we don't have like MRIs that can DVR these DMT trips for us so that other people can see like, no, this thing knew right then. It was like waiting for me to, so I mean, I don't really trust our own. I don't trust human perception. I don't trust human memory, and so I take most of this with a grain of salt. But it was I mean, I have to admit, it was like at the time I was like, holy shit, this god or simulator or programmer or something was just like giving me very clear instructions to like, I don't know, figure out a way of getting more people to explore this space. Is something. I mean, DMT's always been. Anytime I've been like in a DMT space and been like, okay, well, let's just say that this is real. Like, what do you want me to do with it? And DMT, if it does have some sort of anything that resembles an answer, is usually just like, well, tell people, just tell people, and which is always like, tell them what?
Yes.
like I mean, it's so bizarre and just a complete like inverse relationship compared to our perception of this world, and what the DMT space is just so foreign and different. There's not much to tell there. I mean, it's just grasping at straws, really. I mean, and I say that being someone that I've talked about DMT for hours upon hours on podcasts like this. I've written about DMT. I've tried to articulate the experience. And I mean, it's not that that's not worthwhile. Great. We should capture as much as we can, but it does seem pretty futile. Like when you're in that space, in that moment, and you're seemingly being shown the building and end of this universe and every other multiverse that we can't even imagine, all in the course of like 30 seconds. I mean, what do you do with that?
No, you tell people exactly that experience, of course. Parse it into words. I mean, I always think of it like it's like we're a piece of hardware, and there's this advanced operating system that runs on this other form of hardware. We get a glimpse of it, and now we have to translate. And usually what it comes out, as you probably know, is the inane ramblings of an insane person. And experientially in your mind, you're like, no, like this actually does make sense. Some people, especially psychonauts who really push in these boundaries, and truthfully, the people who go over the edge and are able to integrate back, do develop this ability to communicate, maybe not with explicit words. The energy or whatever they're conveying when they're speaking does resonate with people. And I think that's ultimately, in a weird way, when you meet these beings, and I've never done DMT, never done ayahuasca, I've done a fair amount of LSD and psilocybin, but when you meet and have these experiences and they tell you to tell people about it, I think we like to egoically think we're gonna tell people about it, of course. And what inevitably ends up happening is this weird kind of like integration with our own psychology, our own physiology, our social dynamics. And lo and behold, what ends up happening? You maybe get a slightly different experience of telling people about it, but nevertheless, this is what happens. People start hearing about these things. If I hadn't got on this podcast and mentioned what happened with me in terms of my month-long schism from reality and going over where everything was a synchronicity, I wouldn't have had like the dozens, if not more people hit me up, be like, yo, that happened to me. That happened to
Yeah.
me, and I thought it was crazy, and I kind of knew I wasn't, but I heard you explain it in a way that made me feel like I'm not crazy. And I think that's an important thing that we should address during all of this. Like, words, yeah. I heard you say another thing on the Pete Holmes thing, which is I remember after my break with reality, and I was manic in air quotes and got diagnosed as manic depressive, and bipolar. Had a depressive episode right afterwards, which was very
Right.
jarring for me because I, unlike you, like that wasn't a familiar feeling with me. I'd never been depressed. I'm like, what the fuck is this? Went through it. I think I mentioned before, got put on lithium, eventually went off of it with the consent of my psychiatrist and my mom. I just wanted to know people that I was doing this like professionally. I didn't want to just make decisions for myself unilaterally after having been kind of in a damaged state. But after I did that, I kind of began to be able to process what may or may not have happened. And I think when you go over the edge and are able to kind of integrate some of these experiences and put them into words for people in a way that makes sense, that isn't just like a schizophrenic yelling on the street, like, they're in my head, they're in my head, it's really fucking beneficial. However, to go back to your original point, words can really fall short of trying to communicate this really profound experience that, for as much as our intellect and rational part of our brain wants to discount and say, oh, well, there's this explanation, there's that, maybe this happened. Once that's kind of burned out, you're like, all right, I have to decide, is this real? Am I going to believe in this, or is it going to serve me in any way? So I just want to point that out, that like I can relate to being told you must communicate something. In my case, it was unconditional love, which is just like a horrible word to go around saying to everyone after never mentioning it before. I was like 20 years old. I'm like, unconditional love, guys, you don't understand. It's the meaning of everything. Everything is connected. They're like, all right, Noah officially took too much acid. He's lost his fucking mind.
Get away from me, pervert.
Exactly. It's like you exactly. Decades later, I'm like, oh shit. Maybe I actually like got a little bit of something and I was communicating in the best of my abilities. Now that I have a better understanding of it, maybe we can kind of flesh it out more. But not to digress. Continue with your experience.
Yeah, I mean, I've had, since talking about my experience on I guess Duncan Trussell's Family Hour and Pete Holmes, You Made It Weird, or kind of the two bigger ones that I really went in depth and people maybe want a longer version. I would check those out, but I only mention it because I had the same thing where tons of people have written me since. I've never heard anyone. I don't read books about psychedelics, and I don't like watch documentaries about psychedelics or anything. I'm a little stubborn in that way. I just don't want to be influenced.
Sure.
And so I have, and I talk with psychonauts, and I have friends that do and I've had plenty of psychedelic experiences with myself, of course, but with others.
Yeah.
And I have never heard anyone have an experience come anywhere near resembling mine. And then, but since talking about it on the podcast, tons of people have written me saying that they have, and so like, I mean, yeah, it's nice when people are like, oh, I wasn't crazy, but I part of me was like, I go back and forth, and I'll get into the story in a minute, but I actually think it's important to lay down like some of the disclaimers about like my feelings too, because we all have our many biases, and now it's been 9 months since the start of this experience for me. I had another,
which isn't long, which isn't
recently.
Yeah, and that's not that long, man. You know that, right?
Right.
It probably feels like a long time because you're not in the exact hyperacute state anymore. But like 9 months, man, like this shit happened to me in 2004. I'm still having days where I'm like, holy shit, that's what that was? Like, the linearity of time really erodes over linear time. It's quite unusual. So that's not that long, but I mean, I get that it's space removed from the actual acuteness of the experience.
Yeah. And I mean, I also, So it's been relieving for other people, I guess, that have been through similar experiences. But it's also, part of it's interesting for me to read that other people are having these experiences. Part of it is like troubling in a way. Part of it is like, oh, I was actually just kind of finally talking myself into like, oh, I must have just went crazy. And none of that was real, or maybe I'm like making up these stories after the fact somehow without realizing it. That's almost a relief for me to tell myself that. And so to have people be like, no, that's exactly what's happening.
Fuck.
Oh no, maybe it is. So after that DMT experience, which ultimately wasn't, especially by comparison, was not that bizarre at all. DMT is just crazy, and there's always like things at least as crazy as that happening in a DMT space. But it had also been 9 months since I'd done DMT, so it was like I had kind of forgotten how crazy DMT was. So anyway, I'd only done ayahuasca 2 times. I'm a DMT guy, and I had done ayahuasca 2 times in the past prior to this experience I'm about to share, and they were really pretty mild. Compared to smoking DMT, which is, I guess, a concentrate of it. It just seemed like different in its own ways, but in terms of like intensity, it didn't seem much more intense or profound or anything like that than any mushroom trip,
Sure.
a regular or maybe a stronger mushroom trip. Maybe a little more clarity than some of those stronger mushroom trips. But anyway, I was just like not expecting much. So the unfortunate thing about that was like we had gone to shoot me doing ayahuasca at this place, and I ended up having such a strong DMT experience that we shot and some other things that we had shot at the same time that I just wasn't up for it. But then I was like, I wanted to, I was like, I'll go and do ayahuasca, and that way I'll be able to like have a slowed down version and figure out what's happening. And then I'll go and do an ayahuasca experience like for camera, or I'll just like bring ayahuasca home with me and I'll do it like, because we were also having trouble like, a lot of these ayahuasca ceremonies are in group settings and stuff. So you don't want to be like recording other people and everything else. So I was like, well, I'll just go and do a ceremony myself to get in the mindset, and then like that'll help me prepare for when we record something. It's all unfortunate because I wish that this would have been recorded, which it doesn't. It would have been impossible to record because there's other people there and everything else. But I may never record an ayahuasca. So this might have been the only take at it. So I went and I did ayahuasca, and I had just these really kind of crazy synchronicities start afterwards. The ayahuasca experience itself, to do a very shortened version of it, I was just kind of getting these messages about how it was like, to simplify it, I would say like how history kind of repeats itself and works in these cyclical kind of patterns, and there's these balances and these different kind of characteristics keep on popping up through history in forms of like great leaders or awful people or whatever it might be. These patterns keep on popping up of these different communicators, through like Jesus being one of them, but also like Hitler and all these other different people and this again, this was like, I'm sitting here having the ayahuasca experience. There's nothing terribly crazy about it. I was, all of these things are like people that I know. If I was raised Muslim, maybe it would have been, Muhammad or Allah or whatever.
Sure.
But ayahuasca was saying that, so there was this DMT extended state study that I had interviewed this guy about for the documentary, and ayahuasca was saying that I like need to like kind of tell more people about DMT. Ayahuasca was specifically saying like DMT, like I was kind of be like some spokesman for DMT or some stupid shit like that. I'm not sure that's like exactly the case. This is all like metaphors for things,
like an advocate. Yeah,
but it was kind of like showing me. It was showing me that like I was going to look really crazy, but that would like be enough to grab people's attention, and then I would be able to kind of explain these crazy experiences in a more grounded way. It specifically was talking about this DMT extended state thing that I had this guy on that he's working on. I had on my documentary, and not that it means anything, but I also had within that ayahuasca experience, I'm gonna forget another weird synchronicity thing that happened, but which I'll explain. I'll explain the synchronicities in a bit.
Okay,
but. Another thing was out of nowhere, I thought of this one professor who I'm a fan of, who has some like strong opinions about changing the education system, and I was kind of thinking about how humans have gotten away from the way that we used to educate ourselves, like in the hunter-gatherer tribe of like the whole community being together and
Absolutely.
Learning from each other. And now we're like very isolated and put in these little groups and separated by age and everything else. And again, didn't think too much of any of this stuff, but ayahuasca was like, it was just like, okay, so are you ready for like this download or something like that? And I was just, I was just like, within a psychedelic experience, it's usually just within your benefit to be accepting of whatever experience comes your way.
Yeah, generally,
and
yes.
So I'm just like, sure, and that's when it was like I didn't read the terms and conditions.
Yep.
Exactly. and this like what felt like a lightning bolt. I actually thought that lightning hit this house, is what I thought happened, but it felt like a lightning bolt in my mind or something. I got the house I was in just started shaking, and I just got these intense messages of collective consciousness and how it can be shaped and influenced by just different a lot of times kind of a general like general consensus shapes a lot of this but individuals can also influence, but it also has this big influence on each individual's life. And it was it was kind of how like this collective conscious somehow exists on this like other plane of existence, that we are somehow like tapping into,
Like
our
interface with it. Yes.
yeah, and which is like different ideas than I'm used to having or exploring on like my science podcast.
Yeah.
Um, where I don't think we'll probably ever talk about collective consciousness on my science podcast. But anyway, get done with the ayahuasca experience. I'm like convinced that I kind of went into it being like, I'll do a bunch of ayahuasca and just like, everyone sees like God or gets a message from God or whatever on ayahuasca. I'll do a bunch of ayahuasca just to like prove that you're not getting any messages from God. And then I got like a very specific
no shit.
message from God.
That's what happens.
And so after, and I was supposed to do another ayahuasca ceremony the following day. I was like, that's all that I needed. That was amazing. I wasn't scared. I was thrilled about it.
Yeah.
It was this beautiful experience. Gave me a lot to think about. One strange thing was that I was like, did anyone else feel the house shake during that? And then they're like, oh yeah, like the people on my side of the room all felt the house shake. And we went and checked into it, and there was just this enormous crack in the foundation of this house, like right under where my head was. That happened at the exact second that I had this like big download. And that's, and that's all like our consciousness can tell us stories and explain, like, reflecting back on it, there's no reason to believe that like I didn't feel like a little rumbling first, and my brain
Was
came
just
up
a little.
with
Yep.
story of explaining this as it was happening before I was like consciously aware that this house was falling down, and there had been like rain there recently. It was part of like this hill pushing against.
I heard you mention this. Intuitively, do you think that those physical or potential physiological explanations are what happened, or do you think there's probably some resonance between your internal state and the actual physical crack? Intuitively.
Intuitively, I think I put a crack.
No shit. All right, cool. We're on the same page. Great.
But that's fucking crazy.
Yeah, no shit, man.
So then the next day, so I didn't have phone reception where that was. The next day, when I went down off of this mountain and I had phone reception, the first text message was from this guy with this DMT extended state thing. And he was like, hey, we're announcing this study in 2 days of this get together that we're filming it for like Gaia TV or whatever. And we're wondering if you'll be like the first volunteer to take part in this. Like, we have everyone out, we have all the scientists and everything together. We just need like some.
You're the missing piece. We need you, of course. Right.
Like, what the fuck? Because that's like what ayahuasca was saying was going to happen. And by the way, I'm not sure that ever will happen. So it's not that it's necessarily it's meant anything anyway. Or maybe this is all that needed to happen was for me to tell this stupid story.
Who's to say?
And then like the second thing that happened was I got a message from that professor who I'd written like 3 months earlier, being like, hey, and this guy doesn't study like education systems or anything like that. He just has views on it.
Sure.
So it's not like I've never read any work of his on other than like some tweets of him criticizing the education system. It just happened to influence my ayahuasca experience, and he was in there, and then I got a message from him the next day. He's just like, hey, I hadn't like I just got this or just had a chance to respond or whatever. And he's like, and here, good to hear from you. Here's this article that I just wrote, and it's all about like how to change the education system. And then, and I was like, I wrote him. I'm like, that's crazy. And I was just like putting myself out there, and also a little manic at the time. And I was like, I was actually just thinking about you during an ayahuasca trip last night. And he's like, oh, that's weird. I wrote this on a mushroom trip. I didn't know that he had. That's why I'm not saying his name, because I don't want to out him as a
Sure.
illegal drug user. And so that was, kind of crazy, and all that stuff. And then I just started. So like I kind of went to this thing that was about how, talking about the study. Like the main guy putting it together thinks that it's messages from the future, from like a different dimension that we can't perceive, that's independent of time or whatever.
Sure.
And so I was kind of thinking about how to test that and how ideas could interact with us, like independent of time. And then like as soon as I started thinking that, just like weird stuff would start. Like I was staying at a friend's house, and I would start having some idea about like these different characters popping up through different generations in different time, for example. Well, then I would like be writing about that idea, and then like my friend turned on like this new Sherlock Holmes episode, which was them, instead of set in modern times, set back in like the 40s or 50s for some like a special episode or whatever. But it was like exactly the sort of thing that I like writing about. But like any one example of something like that wouldn't sound significant in any way, but they just kept on happening.
Yes.
And it just seemed like so much more than a coincidence. And I wasn't sleeping, and I was pretty manic. And then I went to this Roger Waters show about a week after my ayahuasca experience, and I was feeling great at this time.
Yeah,
I wasn't sleeping, but I was feeling fantastic.
I know the feeling, my friend. It's pretty fucking amazing.
Yeah,
I know it.
Coming up with great ideas,
and like truthfully, for as much as I look back and I'm like, oh, that was kind of insane. Genuinely amazing ideas and creative output that's like objectively good. I get it.
mean, I was at the time staying with because where I went to do the ayahuasca, I stayed with this scientist friend of mine who's like a very, very bright guy, and I was like, I mean, I was telling him my ideas, and he's a very skeptical person, but he was like confirming that my ideas were like very, very intelligent and interesting and everything.
Awesome.
And that's someone that person's never done a psychedelic before.
They're grounded.
Grounded. And so the first week was really awesome. Then Roger Waters, I had gotten these tickets from a fan, and we had already kind of planned on doing mushrooms and everything. And I felt like it probably wasn't a good idea for me to do mushrooms.
And you knew
like,
that, yeah.
I've been up for a week. I'm manic. This is like, but it's like my girlfriend and I's kind of anniversary, and I was catching up with these friends, and like we've been planning this for months. I kind of need to do these mushrooms, and earlier that day, I came up with this idea that I was like, well, let's say like the DMT study is like this extended state is this way of getting information from the future. Like, how would you test that? And
like non-locally. I get it.
Yeah. Like how could I, like, so if I were able to go in and talk with some being that lived outside of time or something like that, could I have it like influence like a past experience or that present. So could I have it like have someone else give me like once I come out of this DMT experiment, could someone like hand me an envelope that has contents that I couldn't know what they are, tell anyone to do that, but they would like be meaningful to me. And then I was like, well, what's to stop it from like, why would I need to wait that long if this is like time? Or like, why couldn't someone just hand me an envelope like today?
You're right, of course.
Manila envelope, like, and this is just, I'm having a zillion ideas like this. None of them are like terribly meaningful or like right on or smart or anything like that. But that was just like a thought that I had that I expressed to my girlfriend, who's getting more and more concerned with me, and my ramblings. And we go to this Roger Waters concert, and this guy that works for the tour, who got me the tickets, comes like into the hospitality room or whatever where we're at before the show, and he's like, "Oh, hold on, I have something for you." And he goes,
no,
and he brings this fucking manila envelope.
Amazing.
I'm like, what the fuck is that? And then I open it up, and it's this autographed photo from Roger Waters, who's like my favorite musician of all time. and I'm like, what the? And I was like, I gotta sit down. Like, I need to sit. Like, that's like right then is when I started like getting a little overwhelmed.
Yes.
I started like, oh no, like what's actually happening right now? Am I losing my mind? I'm just like, I'm trying to breathe and everything. And like, it wasn't like exciting, like I'm a messenger from like,
yes, I get it.
Like I mean, it was intense. And
they're like it's what the way I describe that feeling, and it can come in many different ways. It's what I refer to as a cataclysmic thought. It's something that upends the way you perceive reality or an experience, that starts to transcend a psychedelic or like meditative experience. And when it merges with your consensus reality, you know, unless you have the benefit of just completely discounting it and be like, whatever, it just shifts what's going on in your brain. And once that state is reached, at least for me and other people I've spoken to, that begins a very interesting journey for your mind. You don't leave that instantly. Like, you're kind of in that spot now, and you kind of got to feel and grope around for what's going on.
Well, yeah, now your brain just has to like relearn everything that it knew about life very quickly, and there's just a completely new like, oh, the rules have now changed, and it's down, and there is no time, and so, you know, we need to quickly reassess everything, and that leads to some problems.
A little bit, Ken.
But yeah, so during this show, I mean, the show is very much this Us and Them tour that he did was very much an illustration of like history repeating it. They took all of these old classic songs and applied them to like the Trump White House, you know, and it's just like perfect. You would think that they came up with the song yesterday or something like that. But it's just there's these truisms through time. And so there was like some of the artwork and stuff resembled some of the stuff that I had been kind of trying to make sense of how time works, and it was fucking crazy. It was just like, and I'm like, am I dying? Right? Did I like already die? And this is a simulation.
Yes.
And this like what is this? Like, this isn't. I don't think that this is real. I just didn't think that it was real. And I was, and my girlfriend was like really scared for me, and that was like, so then that became, so now I'm like having to manage her fear,
Yes.
and which is like, I, it almost, the whole process almost would have been much easier just like by myself somewhere, like out in the woods, or around, or if I would have like, what I should have done is gone back to like the shaman's place uh, that I did Iowa, and like just hung out there for a week.
Yeah.
And hashed it out with someone that's like
Knew kind of what the fuck was
way up
going on.
for talking about hyperspace and different dimensions and stuff like that.
Yes.
And instead, my girlfriend, who's a social worker and deals with crazy people all the time, is like seeing all of these red flags and having to be like, oh no, we need to get him to a hospital. And then I'm like, worried that I'm going to be institutionalized for life. That's the thing with like being a psych ward, which I eventually ended up going to, is they don't like tell you how long you're there, or if you're just like, they're like, we're gonna keep you here for life,
which is like kind of a mind fuck if you think about it. If someone's kind of going through a psychological schism, the not knowing if you're ever going to be here, that's like what the fuck are you doing? Give me some idea of what the fuck is going on, please. You person in the coat. Thank you. Yeah, man, that's crazy. I didn't get institutionalized. I mean, I had a support system and friends and family, and luckily my behavior was so out of character, even for being a weirdo like myself. Like it was just so objectively wrong, like probably what happened with your girlfriend. And I mean, let me ask you this. So continue your story. You're still kind of what you would define as manic at this point, right? Cascading thoughts, like relatively up, even if not as pleasant and like exuberant as before. Still
like
up.
Not sleeping, and it was just that paranoia was starting to come in. Yeah. I was starting to really. I mean, also when you don't sleep for that long, it was just like my cognitive functions were just kind of falling apart, and my sense of logic and everything else was just really starting to fall apart.
Yeah. I definitely I can relate to all of that. Keep going. I don't know what I was going to say. Just keep going with the story.
Well, I mean, there's more examples of synchronicities and everything, but I just like, when I was in the psych ward itself, there was like a schizophrenic person that was like I was having like weird vibes with, and I was going to like draw out these ideas on this whiteboard that I was having, and then I was like, oh, I don't want to look crazy, and so I decided not to. I went and took a nap, and then this guy drew out all of my ideas. We weren't talking about my ideas. He drew everything that I was thinking, like better than he was like this graffiti artist or something. And he did it better than I could have. Like his and what he drew, like advanced the ideas that I was thinking. Like it was like more thought out than my own ideas, and it was like really bizarre. It's all of how ideas pass through time and space and exist in this other dimension on some other like mainframe or something.
Yeah.
And how that's possible, and how ideas take shape and form and take on lives of their own. And and so there was like things like that were like, and this was when I was now on medication, and I had slept. They like
still happening,
and it was still happening.
Yeah.
And it didn't. So that was like, I went to the psych ward after like 3 or 4 weeks after ayahuasca.
That sounds,
I think week 3 maybe. And then I was there for 7 days. I fortunately talked myself out of there. But I was still like on a like mushroom trip, basically, for like another like 4 weeks after that.
So like almost 2 months total, let's assume, starting from the date of ayahuasca.
Just like tripping, basically.
Hey man, I've been there. It was 3 months for me. It's what's so interesting about a lot of the things you said is, so my synchronicities were never ending. There was no gap in normalcy between like I had a synchronicity and then it was kind of like shit was normal and it was a synchronicity. It was unceasing through the dream state. Meaning, like, I had never had lucid dreams. I couldn't do great dream call. I smoke a lot of weed. It's a dream suppressant. Still was smoking a ton of weed, but was literally synchronistic. Everything was synchronicity through waking reality, dreaming reality, the same type of insane phenomena with like physical manifestations of either people or objects. Schizophrenics on the street. I lived in Boston. I went to Berkeley School of Music while this was happening. I was walking down Boylston, and there was a famous homeless guy there. Famous homeless guy. It was an infamous homeless guy who wouldn't talk to anyone. It was this black dude, really skinny, hung outside of store 24. And I was walking back at the inception of one of these LSD experiences I had that kind of was the genesis that kind of pushed me here. Walking down the street, this dude never said a word to anyone. He looked right at me and he goes, "You know what I'm talking about."
Yeah.
I'm like, and I knew he knew. And I'm like, how the fuck did you know? Like, what the fuck is going on?
I know that shit was happening to me too. The fucking people on the street.
Yeah, the street people. It still happens to me. You retain some of it. It happens. So what? My theory on that. This is just bear with me while I flesh it out. I think schizophrenics, what we label as schizophrenics, and we have to accept that we're contextualizing people who have these symptoms within a made-up word that we've kind of ascribed all of these qualities and sort of ways of speaking and thinking to these people. I think kind of what happens with schizophrenics and why when you kind of go off in this other dimension or whatever the fuck it is, and you're kind of in that space that I called it a dimension, they're like sieves. They pick up on all of this shit, but a lot of them either have been told that they're crazy, maybe were institutionalized for a very long period of time, maybe drifted out of regular society, found themselves homeless and just disenfranchised, and they can't go up to someone and say, "Hey, listen, I had this experience where I had a transcendental thing and this is what happened. I'm not crazy. I'm just picking up on information from other people and I have some valuable things to say." But they recognize and can pick it up when they get in proximity physically to people like you or me who have gone through these experiences. And they're like, "Oh shit, this person gets it. They are my lifeline to consensus reality," whether they're consciously thinking that or not. I remember specifically as I was I got like indoctrinated into an entire subculture of homeless people in Boston. It was there's a whole other world out there, like not another dimension, but there are people who are not in our reality who we see every day. And maybe, we think they're, poor and alcoholics and whatever. They've experienced some other thing and this is their way of dealing with it. And I think it's interesting that you, in the psych ward, which is probably, you will look back probably at that experience as time goes on and be more and more grateful for being in that place, because that's something that a lot of people don't get exposed to, especially the metaphor of being in a psych ward and being able to come out, talking yourself out. Like that shit's a valuable thing, man. Like it was just random schizophrenics on the street coming up to me. It still happens, but I think they get a little more sense. I'm a little more grounded in reality now, so they don't swarm. So interesting. Right. So interesting. Wow.
Yeah.
That's so interesting, man. Yeah. So, okay, you're in the psych ward. Would you describe yourself? There was a crash, right? An inevitable crash from the euphoria and mania, or was it kind of like a slow descent?
I wouldn't call it a crash. I would just, the mania just kind of slowly, I mean, I was on medication. The mania just slowly was dissipating. And then it just like, after baseline, it just kept on dropping. It just didn't stop dropping. I didn't like instantly crash into, I didn't like spelunk into the darkness. Like I just slowly, like gradually made my way down into like an exceptionally brutal depression.
Yes, that's what happened.
For like 2 months or so. Yeah. Used mushrooms to get back out of it again.
Kudos to you, my friend.
Oddly enough, went really well. But then I had a month after that, I had another mushroom experience that triggered mania again. Same sort of shit happened. I started taking meds right away this time, so it was like it really marginalized or mitigated. Yeah, mitigated the mania quite a bit. But then going off the meds again, I then that was another 2 months of depression. That was like, that time it was like a couple weeks of mania. And I lost some work that time. I couldn't perform on stage. I was on stage and I was just like, I'm telling jokes, and all of a sudden I'm realizing that I like created all of this simulation.
Yeah.
That I created like these people in the audience to like sit and laugh at me. I'm like, what the fuck? And then I like, is this like a joke that I'm playing on myself? Like, is this some? And
Oh my God.
so I just wasn't capable. I just started like freaking out on stage. Like I would just like forget all of my material because I just lost in like what the fuck is happening right now. So I mean that at least for I think that one day I'll probably do something again, for sure, or start dabbling back into psychedelics. But it might be like a couple years before I can do that. And right now I have no real need or purpose for psychedelics at the moment. I've also kind of resolved, like the inner work of working on yourself and like figuring out your insecurities and stuff. It's not that I'm perfect now, but I've like resolved enough from 21 years of psychedelic use to, I mean, that's kind of been for some time now. I haven't really been getting like huge therapeutic benefits from psychedelics.
It's good you can recognize that, man. Like that's something that I think a lot of people struggle with, like, because it's such an alluring experience for people, that to be able to recognize if it's not actually serving you or anyone around you, to be able to be like, oh wait. I mean, that's hard. That's a hard thing for a lot of people. Truthfully.
Yeah, I mean, fortunately, psychedelics are also a little bit self-regulating in the fact that they're fucking scary, kind of. Like,
it's so true.
Maybe not in the experience, but the working yourself
the anxiety up to it. Yep.
Doing the experience is, it's not like it's not like cocaine or something like that, where it's like, I should wait. Like, you're not. It's the exact opposite. Like for psychedelics, having to like work yourself up into doing it.
That's so funny. That's so true. Well, so, and I mean, like personally, from my experience, and I used to take, I didn't know what a heroic dose was, but I was taking 10 plus grams of mushrooms at a time, at least 500 mics of LSD. Like I was going deep at the time. And again, it wasn't frivolous. I wasn't just doing this for no reason recreationally, but since that experience, my dosages of psychedelics have been very low. I almost exclusively only microdose. I haven't done a real macrodose of LSD since then, partially because of fear, because I think once you kind of lose your mind, you get two things. One is if you're able to kind of get it back, quote unquote, you develop either a faith or a confidence that it's possible to lose your mind and come back, which a lot of people, if they've never thought about losing their mind, if it starts to happen, it's quite a terrifying experience and you don't actually know if you're going to get it back. But also there is a concurrent fear, which is, oh, shit, could it happen again? And could I not potentially come back?
Right.
So when I look at your experience, or when I hear about your experience, having gone through very similar things and heard them from other people, to me, whether this is our human wanting to ascribe a meaning to an experience, to me, they are meaningful experiences and we can gain things out of those. We can't force the insights or knowledge or wisdom that we can get from them. But I think over time, they reveal themselves. And I think that's like, I'd be curious, like now you're 9 months away, which like I said, is not, it probably feels like a long time to you, but not that long in the grand scheme of things.
Well, it's only been 3 months since my other manic episode at the beginning of the year. So
which was what was that one? That was the
that was the mushroom.
That was the mushroom one. Wait, what was the mushroom one?
That was, I'd started feeling better and then I did mushrooms again. It sent me into mania.
What happened that sent you into mania? Do you remember specifically what it was?
Yeah, I started having all these insane synchronicities again. I realized like I realized that shows that I'd been watching were like actually messages to me had like been created, like certain like aspects of a show, like one line, like
I get it.
when you watch like a children's cartoon, and like and you get to pick up on like these hidden meanings that like the children don't get, but it
Yes.
works on many levels. That's like what the universe does for people that are like tapping into
Yeah.
these realms. There's another layer.
So what does it mean? Like, how do you filter and process this at this point? I imagine you still have experiences of profound synchronicity from time to time. Like
I pretty much try to ignore any time that I have anything resembling a synchronicity at the moment. I'm just trying to. I still have them sometimes. But I immediately am like, nope, not indulging in that. I'm not. And
That's what I
I
did.
need a break. I need a break from that for a while.
Yeah.
And then and I also mostly just because I don't get paid for thinking about these things. I get paid for doing stand up and have like projects with my science podcast and whatnot that I have to do. So I would, if I just focused a bunch of my effort into documenting and hypothesizing about these psychedelic experiences, I would probably be broke in like 6 months. So I have to separate myself a little bit.
So here's an interesting thing that's happening to me right now. And I've been mentioning this in podcasts. It's typically about conversations like this, but I deviated over the past 6 months or so because I've had Bitcoin since 2013, and I've been really heavily into cryptocurrency, and it's obliterated the concept of money for me. Like I don't work anymore. I take care of my kid. I do whatever the fuck I want because money has been shown to me not only as something like conceptually that isn't real, but now we actually like, holy fuck. Like we make money out of nothing now. We trade magic internet beans and now I don't have to worry about my mortgage anymore. Great. It seems to me, and just to be clear about what you said about forgetting about it, 2-3 years at least after my experience, that's exactly what I did. I had to ignore it. You have to fucking integrate back in. You don't have to. I chose to integrate in. I got really back into football, just like regular meat and potato shit. So I wasn't just off in space because I think that's important. Obviously, it never goes away and you can retrospectively look at it. But man, I'm telling you, when you eliminate the financial anything from your career, from your life, from anything, that's one of the reasons I love cryptocurrency so much. People begin to think about this shit. People begin to think about like, fuck, I don't have to worry about bills. I don't have to worry about this. What the fuck is going on here? Like, what are those synchronicities? Is there a way for me to approach them without me getting caught up or lured? What I think happened to me, maybe this will resonate with you, during this very long episode, 3+ months, is at first it was almost a very pure experience. I was almost like a vessel and a channel that shit was just getting pumped through and I was able to like just like take it. Then after like a month and a half, I was like, oh, it's me. Like I'm doing this. Like I'm some special fucking person who's getting this information. I'm creating this. These people are for me, like exactly what you were experiencing on stage. And I think what happened was my 24-year-old, 23-year-old brain and ego was getting wrapped into a very profound experience. And I thought that I was the genesis of it. And I got very wrapped up in it. And that's when things started getting like kind of paranoid, a little bit of spiraling, kind of megalomania type of thoughts, all of these things. If you would have given me at that moment infinite time to process that in that moment, I wouldn't have been able to realize that. 6-7 years later, I started to be like, oh shit, like there's something valid to my experience that is outside of my personal experience of it. What is the meaning behind that? What purpose can it actually serve for either my life or other people? And I think those things naturally come. There's no one blanket answer. Maybe there is, but there's not a blanket answer that you can say, oh, well, this is the meaning of your experience, Shane. This is why you went through that. I think part of it is, I know in our last conversation, it was like kind of like I was proposing the mystical side of things. You were the scientific analytic side of things. And I think what's so interesting to me is like now, like they kind of merge together, and we see they're not necessarily separate things. And I think we're probably like, truthfully, man, like 10, 15, 20 years in linear time ahead of people being able to like actually have discussions and be like, oh, yes, of course, Shane and Noah were talking about non-local archetypes and cyclical patterns. Of course. It's like, no,
we're going to be such fucking irritating hyperspace hipsters.
Yeah, totally. We were talking about it back then. Exactly. That's a great example. So I guess like in wrapping this up in some regard, like, are you happy? I don't know if happy is the right word. What is your kind of relationship to the experiences you went through? How are you contextualizing them for yourself?
I mean, I don't have like regrets about them necessarily. And I'm not like a guy that's like, don't look in the past. No regrets. No, I have lots of regrets in my life. Tons of them. I'll have more by this time next week. It's just not. I thought it was. I mean, some of my friends were a little worried about me. That's, whatever. That was okay. My girlfriend is like, she'll get over it. Mostly, and like some of the stuff about it she thought was like very, very interesting too.
Sure, of course.
It was mostly it's just like, I wish that my family would have never gotten involved or known about it, because I'm never going to explain to my Midwestern.
Right.
Like I'm going next week to Jamaica to help with a psilocybin retreat. I was going to be doing psilocybin as well, but no, I'm not going to. But I'll be there, cool, sitting and helping out and helping people integrate and whatnot. I mean, as far as my mom knows, I might as well be like shooting crack cocaine into my ears or whatever however she thinks drugs work.
Right. Dude, you reminded me of something. So Jamaica is a very interesting place. I've been 3 or 4 times. It's one of the only places I've visited outside of this country. There's something about that place, and you mentioned something, I think it was on the Pete Holmes podcast, where you felt like you had been there before with those people for a ceremony you did.
It was really strange. Yeah. I've done lots of mushrooms before, but the mushrooms there were like really strange. I was like, is there some fucking witchcraft going on here? What the fuck is happening?
It's those high vibes, man. It's a really weird island, and there's a lot of weird history to that island, and the consciousness there is not like our country at all. And I think that has a very overt influence on it. But I love those experiences when you kind of, not psychedelic, kind of like, whoa, man, I feel like I've been here, but like a very visceral, clear, like, oh, I've been here. Like, I know what this is. Those are some of my favorite experiences. And I think they're very much related to those synchronicities that we can have. They pierce the veil for the moment in time. As much as you and I like to talk about time not existing, it being illusion, and not working the way we think, we still have to get up every day, do our regular shit. So there's this kind of like boundary that we try to cross over when we sleep, or psychedelics or whatever. But when you get those little piercings, whether it's psychedelics or not, I think it'll be interesting when you're trip sitting in Jamaica this next time, what it feels like. Because I've noticed since my experience back in the day, 2004 or so, man, if I'm around people who are tripping, I'm basically tripping these days. Like it's nuts. And like, I mean, I'm tripping. Like, it's not like, oh, I think I feel like I'm tripping. It's like, no, I'm doing it. It's a very interesting phenomena. Here's what I'll leave it on this note, at least with us. I think what we experience here, if we were put in another culture throughout time, they'd probably be like, oh, you're getting a calling to be a shaman. You're having these transcendent experiences that everyone's not having them. They're capable of having them, but you're getting a very deep taste of this medicine, or whatever you want to call it. If you choose to pursue and follow that path, you take on a kind of the archetype of the wounded healer, someone who has really like been through the fucking shit, but has come out now with the wisdom of how to help other people through it. It's a role that I found no one willingly ever takes on. No one's like, yeah, I'm going to get really fucked up. I'm going to lose my fucking mind. Then I'm going to be able to help people. It's like, no, I'd rather just help people. Can I skip all the bullshit of like the fucking horrible stuff? But I mean, that's kind of the more distance I get from my specific experience, I do sense a greater, more clarity, but also that related to where you started with this, these cyclical things in time, these archetypes, whether it's individuals or consciousness patterns, there is very much something to that concept. And I think right now, in this point in time, and maybe everyone thinks this for their particular era or epoch, there's a lot of shit going on. And this is a very hyper, I think there's a reason why, DMT is telling you to tell other people about DMT and ayahuasca and these things. It's not, some weird egocentric delusion. It's like, hey, there's something going on here. And I think people who are hearing that this is maybe some modality that can help them in some way is worthwhile for sure.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
So I had 3 questions at the end. I'm sure I asked you them before. I think you didn't want to give me answers on them, but you did reluctantly. What's your favorite color?
Yeah, I can see why I would. Right now, let's say purple.
We'll line these up with the last episode. What's your favorite number?
14.
Very cool. Why 14?
777? I don't know why.
Oh, 777. Very interesting. Very, very interesting. And what's your favorite animal?
Ooh. Can I do a fish instead?
Yeah, you can do a fish. It's an animal, I'm pretty sure.
Cuttlefish.
Cuttlefish. Love it. What is the cuttlefish with the like, does it have like ribbony?
It does. It also shapeshifts and can like resemble basically anything. It could like look like a basketball if it wanted.
Could look like a Shane or a Noah. Very interesting.
Yeah.
Dude, thank you so much for coming on and talking about this. Like anytime you have some weird shit going on, know that at least I am here. If you ever just want to shoot me a message, be like, yo, what the fuck? I don't have answers, but I can at least share my experiences and what happened, being just a little farther removed from my own incident, whatever we want to call it. But dude, thank you so much for doing this.
Sure. Thank you. I appreciate it.
But we have a strange anxiety that if we don't interfere, it won't happen. And that's the root of an enormous amount of problem. Life is earnest, and I've got to go on. Then your life is a drag, and not a gain. Now, it's my contention, my personal opinion, this is my basic metaphysical axiom, let me put it that way, that existence, the physical universe, is basically fate. There is no necessity for it whatsoever. It isn't going anywhere. That is to say, it doesn't have some destination that it ought to arrive at.
Pretty good episode. I told you so. Shane, go check him out. He's still doing stand-up. A highly creative person who just, I think, also just a wonderful executor. He just gets shit done, manifests stuff, gets shit done. And I'm really excited that he's kind of, been propelled onto this not knowing, unexplainable, somewhat less empiric path. Not that that's a better thing than anything else, but it's good to have multiple perspectives on this. And I'm glad to hear also that he treated his depression with psilocybin, really found that to be a useful modality. I've not personally done that. Like I mentioned in the episode, I'm not prone to depression. Circumstantial depression, which I think is, we can argue what that really is in culture and everything. But for people who do experience that, I've heard good things about that. Anyway, not for everyone, not encouraging anyone to do anything. But if you get a calling for any of this stuff, certainly worth keeping in mind. All right. I don't know what I'm talking about. Music. Listen, like I said, Eli starts daycare in May. I'm going to have a lot more time, theoretically, to get shit done. There will be music being released. I promise you. I really do promise that. And I want to say this. Got this episode in under the gun. Almost didn't have guests this week. Shane came through in the clutch. If you have guests or people you want to hear on the podcast, let me know. Sometimes that's all it takes. I'll be like, oh, yeah, that's a good guest. Let me hit them up. That's a good way to get shit done. Okay, that's it. See you next week.